The boy who carried ashes. The sky over the Carolina hills burned a dusky red, as if the sun mourned alongside the land. 13-year-old Andrew Jackson trudged through the tall grass, his boots cracked and heavy with clay. Around his waist, tied with fraying leather, hung a small linen pouch. Inside, the ashes of his mother and brothers, his only family, shifted with every step. He didn't speak of them. Not because he'd forgotten, but because speaking made the pain too real, too sharp. Instead, he worked at McKinley's blacksmith shop, hammering iron by day and sweeping soot by night. Mr. McKinley, a gruff man with a limp and a soft heart, had taken Andrew in after the war took everything else. But peace had never truly come. Loyalists still roamed the countryside, bitter and violent. Rumors of revenge whispered through the trees like wind. Andrew heard them, understood them. Sometimes he even felt them. One evening, while cleaning the forge, Andrew ducked beneath the workshop's open window as two unfamiliar voices drifted in. They spoke in hushed tones, but their words landed like sparks on dry wood. Midnight. The Patriots meet in the clearing east of the mill. Burn them out, every last one. Andrew's heart pounded. He recognized the names, men who had once fought alongside his brothers. He didn't hesitate. Wiping his soot-streaked hands on his shirt, he took off into the night. The woods clawed at him, branches tearing at his sleeves, but he didn't stop until he reached the rebel camp. Panting, he relayed everything, the urgency in his voice cracking through their disbelief. By dawn, the ambush had failed. The rebels were ready. The Tories scattered. But victory came with a price. McKinley was dead. They'd found his body behind the forge, throat slit, tools untouched. A message left in blood across the wall: traitors breed traitors. Andrew stood alone in the shop's ruins, clutching the ash pouch so tightly his knuckles turned white. He wanted to scream, to curse the world that kept taking and never giving. But all he did was stare. In silence, he buried McKinley behind the forge, beneath the anvil tree where the blacksmith once sharpened his blades. He carved a crude cross from scrap iron and whispered, "Thank you," though the words felt small. That night, he didn't sleep. Instead, he sat by the dying embers of the forge, staring into the orange glow as if hoping for a sign, of justice, of purpose, of something more than endless grief. He didn't find one. But when dawn broke, Andrew Jackson tightened the pouch at his side, picked up McKinley's hammer, and walked away from the only place he'd ever known. He didn't look back. Not because he wasn't afraid, but because he'd learned. Fear doesn't matter when you've already lost everything. The duel in the dust. The Tennessee sun was unrelenting, casting long shadows across the wooden steps of the courthouse. Andrew Jackson leaned against a hitching post, eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his hat. His coat, though worn, still clung to him like armor. He'd traded soot and grief for law and grit, now known as a rising lawyer with a tongue like steel and a temper to match. He didn't just fight cases. He fought. "Mr. Jackson," came a trembling voice. A woman, draped in black, stepped from the crowd. Her face, pale with exhaustion, was etched with desperation. "They've taken my land. Said my deed was false. My husband died for that farm." Andrew studied her for a moment. No fanfare. No tears. Just quiet resolve. "Who?" he asked. "Judge Whitlow's cousin. Jeremiah Crane." The name soured his tongue. Crane was infamous. Land thief, briber, and bully. The kind of man who always walked free, shielded by coin and connection. Andrew took the case. Within days, he uncovered forged deeds, bribed clerks, and legal sleight of hand. Yet when he brought it before the court, the motion was dismissed without a hearing. Judge Whitlow didn't even look up from his desk. Andrew's jaw tightened. "You knew," he whispered outside the courtroom, standing face to face with Crane beneath the swaying gallows tree. Crane smirked. "The law is a tool, Mr. Jackson. You just don't know how to use it." "I prefer hammers," Andrew replied. By dusk, a challenge was issued. Pistols at 20 paces. Witnesses chosen. The duel would be held at dawn. They met in the dust-choked field behind the tavern, birds silent, wind still. The two men stood like statues. One would leave a hero. The other wouldn't leave at all. The shot cracked like thunder. Crane fell. Andrew lowered his pistol, smoke curling from the barrel like breath. The widow wept, not from joy, but from knowing her land still wouldn't return. Crane was dead, but the power behind him lived on. Judge Whitlow would simply bury the scandal and name another cousin. That night, Andrew sat alone in his office, tossing a forged deed into the fireplace. Flames licked the paper, curling it to ash. He watched it burn. He hadn't saved the widow. He hadn't beaten the system. But he'd delivered a warning. And that, for now, was enough. Still, something in him shifted, like iron cooling too fast. The law, he realized, wasn't made for people like the widow. It was built by men like Crane, protected by men like Whitlow, and enforced by cowards who mistook robes for righteousness. Justice didn't live in courtrooms. It lived in choices. And some choices left blood on your hands. The war inside. The roar of cannon fire echoed across the Mississippi Delta, but Andrew Jackson barely flinched. He stood at the edge of a blood-soaked trench, boots sunk in mud, eyes fixed on the horizon where British forces gathered like a dark storm. The Battle of New Orleans had begun. To his men, Jackson was unshakable, a general forged from frontier hardship, bold and commanding. They called him Old Hickory, not out of affection, but because nothing seemed to break him. But behind the stern face and battle plans, something else festered. Each night, he wrote letters never meant to be sent, scraps addressed to his mother, long dead. He tucked them inside a small leather journal, its corners worn by time and memory. The entries were filled with guilt and longing, confessions penned in a soldier's scrawl. He didn't write of strategy. He wrote of nightmares. On the third night of battle, his camp received a boy no older than 16, Thomas. Eager, bright-eyed, with a smile far too innocent for war. Andrew assigned him to guard duty near his personal tent. The boy reminded him of his brother Hugh, who died in Andrew's arms years ago, feverish and whispering dreams of peace. Days passed. The British pressed harder. Casualties rose. Jackson barely slept. Then came a raid, chaotic and fast. Amid the smoke and screams, Thomas stood his ground, musket raised, until a redcoat's bayonet tore through him like paper. By the time Jackson reached him, it was over. He didn't speak. Just knelt, pressing the boy's hand until the last warmth faded. That night, he buried Thomas himself, away from the others, beneath a willow tree swaying like a mourner. The next day, his officers brought news. British forces had signaled retreat. Surrender was possible. A victory was near. But Jackson's voice was cold. No negotiations. They attacked. It was a slaughter. That evening, a Choctaw scout entered his tent. A quiet man, face painted in ash, eyes sharp as flint. He stood for a moment, then spoke softly. "You don't fight for peace. You fight to bury the voices." Jackson didn't reply. Couldn't. The words struck something raw, something hidden. After the scout left, Andrew opened his journal again. But the ink wouldn't flow. His hand trembled. He wasn't the boy who carried ashes anymore. He was the man creating them. At dawn, he watched the sunrise through the smoke, the battlefield eerily quiet. Victory had come, yes, but it had brought no triumph. Only silence. Only the weight of one more soul laid beneath the soil. The man in the mirror. The fire crackled low in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the faded walls of Andrew Jackson's Tennessee home. Age had not softened him. His back remained straight, voice firm, but illness had crept into his bones like winter, quiet and unrelenting. He avoided mirrors now. Not out of vanity but fear. Not of what he might see, but who he wouldn't recognize. Outside, the fields whispered with wind. Inside, he sat alone with memory. Visitors came often, advisors, allies, political men with plans stitched into their coat. They spoke of presidency, of legacy, of the people's will. Jackson listened, said little, and watched their eyes move more toward opportunity than truth. He no longer trusted men who wore ambition like perfume. One rainy afternoon, a knock came, gentle, hesitant. At the door stood a boy no older than 12, hat clutched in shaking hands. His clothes were patched, but his gaze was steady. "I'm Samuel, sir," the boy said. "My grandmother told me to find you. Said you once tried to help her when no one else would." Jackson's brow furrowed. "She said her name was Abigail Crane." The name caught like a splinter in his memory. The widow. The duel. The land. He hadn't heard that name in decades. Samuel stepped inside, glancing at the saber hanging above the mantel. "I want to be a lawyer. Like you were." Jackson's voice cracked for the first time in years. "Like I tried to be." The boy stayed for hours. They spoke of law, of courage, of what it meant to stand alone. For the first time in years, Jackson laughed. Not loud, but real. A sound not of pride, but of recognition. When the boy left, the house felt warmer. Lighter. Jackson moved to his desk, pulling out the old journal, the one with tear-stained pages and unsent letters. He opened it to a fresh page and dipped the quill. Legacy isn't marble statues or loud applause. It's the fire you leave burning in someone else. A man is not